Welcome to another episode of the Interchange podcast, and thanks for joining me, your host, Ben Lowe. And also, thank you for joining me for another episode of this youth crime short series that we have, which is really trying to shed a light, or I should say shine a light, on the issue which is really plaguing the whole of Australia, but especially the Gold Coast. So today we're joined by Leon Rebello, who is the LNP federal candidate for McPherson. Now, Leon, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to come and, I guess, have a bit of a conversation around youth crime and I guess how it really is impacting the greater community. Mate, before we go any further, can you tell us who you are, what you do, and why this is something that's so important to you?
Well, thanks so much, Ben, for having me. It's actually an absolute pleasure to be here because it's such an important issue, youth crime, and something that, quite frankly, a lot of people speak to me about, but something that I speak to a lot of people about as well because we hear it across our media, we hear it with our neighbours. So it's definitely something that's worth the conversation.
Of course.
So a bit about me. So as you said, I'm the LNP federal candidate for McPherson.
Yep.
Most people don't know what McPherson is.
I didn't until 5 minutes ago.
That's right, exactly. So the Gold Coast is divided into 3 federal seats.
Gotcha.
You've got Fadden up the north, Moncrief, sort of the central Gold Coast, and then the southern end is McPherson. So you look at Merrimack, all of Robina, all of Varsity, Burleigh, and everything south to the border.
Gotcha.
Is pretty much McPherson. So I've been endorsed by the Liberal National Party to contest the next federal election, and that's what I'm working on at the moment.
Awesome. And something that you said is that you're having this conversation around youth crime quite often. So when people are coming to you to talk about youth crime, what is the general conversation they're having? Is it that people are worried about how much it's increasing? Is it about what you guys are doing about it, or what's actually going to change in the future? Like, how do those conversations usually go?
Well, a lot of the time, people either have been victims of youth crime themselves.
Of course, yeah, it affects a lot of people, right?
Exactly, or they know someone who has been a victim. And part of what I do is I host listening posts, I door knock, and I'm very much among the community. And a lot of people come and share their stories with me, and sometimes it's actually quite heartbreaking because of the experiences that they've had to go through. And they want to know exactly what their political leaders are actually going to do about it. And there's 2 parts of concern. I think part of it is saying we don't want this to happen to us.
Of course.
But then there's also a considerable, Australians are compassionate. We also hear a lot about how do we actually stop young people from going down this path in the first place as a country. What are we doing wrong?
How do we prevent, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's right.
And so with that being said, I guess that this is a really big topic on everyone's tongue at the moment. What is on the agenda for the Liberal Party? What is it they want to actually do to help to, I guess, if not completely eradicate, but at least reduce youth crime?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, it's a complex issue that's not going to be done overnight.
Exactly.
But one of the encouraging things that we've seen is a recent change of government at a state level. And the state government the new Premier, David Crisafulli, took a very ambitious and positive approach to youth crime and to what they're doing. And they've announced sort of a 3-stage, I guess, policy approach. And that is that gold standard early intervention idea, the idea of rehabilitation, but rehabilitation with purpose.
Of course.
And then also trying to make sure that there are consequences for actions where people, where society and governments have put in the effort to try and prevent these kids going down the path. But there's, in the past, there hasn't been a deterrent effect. We're going to make sure that there is a deterrent effect as well. So it's a combination of trying to prevent kids from going down the wrong path, and also trying to manage them effectively so that they're prevented from reoffending in the future.
I think something that's really relevant there as well is the fact that, as you said, there hasn't really been consequences for these kids for a very long time. And I was speaking to Jim Keogh about this on the podcast yesterday, and he said that the problem is that these kids get a slap on the wrist, okay? Anywhere up to 18 years old, these kids are literally getting a slap on the wrist and getting back out, and getting a slap on the wrist and getting back out. And they're in the community, which is, I guess, the place that's actually created the problem for them, because a lot of these kids, they say 85% of these young men that end up in juvie justice are diagnosed with some kind of mental illness, whether they come from mental, physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. And that's obviously something that's happened within the environment they've been brought up in, right? So they've been taken from this environment, then put in the court system. Nothing gets changed for them. They get put back in the same environment. And then even the ones that do end up in juvie, they get taken from the environment, put into an environment that incubates the problem, because they're now around the boys. They're around more of these men, and they have that, that gang culture, that community, if you like, almost that cult sort of, I want to be one of these, I want to belong. And so that means they have to do bigger and better to feel like they have to fit in. But then they get taken from this place which is meant to deter them from creating, I guess, more crime in their life or doing more crime in their life, and then put back into the same volatile environment that created the problem in the first place.
Absolutely. And look, part of the issue, as you say, there's also no follow-up afterwards. So these kids get put in, they get incarcerated, they get released, and there's no one to check up on them in the long term, and so they find the same social circles they've been in before, and that's what needs to change. We need to have that long-term follow-up, and I know that's something that the Premier's been speaking about now.
Awesome. So you said that's something the Premier's been speaking about. What would that look like? So for you guys, what sort of, I guess, what sort of procedures are you guys looking at putting in place to help to support these young men? Because I guess the media does a really good job of painting these kids as car thieves and junkies and whatever. But at the end of the day, these are kids that need love. They need role models. They need education and mentoring.
Yeah,
because they still are influential at this age.
That's right. And just to that point as well, I think it's also important. There's been a lot of, as we both acknowledge, there's a lot of talk about youth crime and the effect of it. The vast majority of kids in Queensland do the right thing.
Yeah.
They contribute to society and they follow the rules and they do the right thing.
100%.
We're talking about a group that, is a small portion of the state population. But it is a group that has grown in the past and we need to make sure that we do address it. In terms of what needs to be done, so what that will look like is actually government looking at the evidence-backed community organisations and groups that actually have a track record of doing, work with young people and students.
Of course, yeah.
And I know in my electorate here in McPherson, we've got some great groups. I think of the work that Lisa Logan does with Fight for Youth in Currumbin.
Yeah.
They've got they're an organisation that actually pumps out kids who are better placed to deal with the challenges in society. And I think it's about government proving that they're actually prepared to go in and back a lot of those sort of groups. eSWAV is another one that we spoke about.
Yeah, Mob as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And where we've got organisations, that are not necessarily government, but organisations that are genuinely invested in these kids and are actually getting the results, government should support that and we should get in and back that. And I think that's part of what the plan needs to look like at a federal level as well. So a lot of the issues we're talking about are state level,
yes.
Day-to-day policing and preventing crime is often at a state level. But at a federal level, this is where I come in and the federal Liberal team comes in and says, well, we actually can look at around the country at what's worked and how we can apply that more broadly. And that's where, for example, the Jack's Law that we were talking about is something that could really be used effectively across the country.
Can you talk more into that? So when we say for people that might not understand what Jack's Law is, because I think that just in itself is a really great initiative that would help to at least divert, if not prevent, a lot of these, stabbings and crimes that are taking place where people are getting mugged.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, on the Gold Coast, I think we're very well positioned to broadcast what's worked for us here across the rest of the country. So Jack's Law, for those who don't know, Jack Beasley was a 17-year-old in 2019. He was murdered. He was fatally stabbed in Surfers Paradise. And his parents have, put in a lot of effort and they've gone out of their way to make sure that his legacy could actually be translated into something that actually addresses the problem. And so Jack's Law enables police officers in Queensland to search young people and
so prior to this, the police didn't have the power to search young people because of the whole age bracket.
Well, they didn't have the power to. So they use handheld metal detectors,
yes.
And they didn't have the power to do this. I understand prior to this law coming into place, and since it was trialled on the Gold Coast and it's now law in Queensland. And what's happened is they've actually managed to confiscate over 1,000 weapons from people, and that's a combination of axes and knives and machetes. Now, if these are people, who are carrying these items on public transport, at nightclubs or out in public,
It's crazy.
Think about how many lives that would have saved, because if the chances are, if you're carrying a knife or a machete,
You're going to use it.
that's right.
There's a good chance.
And so I think, it's something that has proven to have worked in Queensland, or to be working. And what we as a federal Liberal Party have committed to, and Peter Dutton, to his credit, has really looked at the evidence here in Queensland, is that we will roll that out across the country as well and support those. So that's where the federal team can actually come and say, okay, what works around the country, and how do we actually provide that, I guess, cohesion of policy across Australia.
And so with that being said as well, I guess these are all new policies that have been trialled and now are starting to come into place. Why do you feel that these are things that hadn't been thought about in the past? Or why is it that, I guess, on a government level, do you feel, in your own opinion, that we haven't put more funding and things like that into other programs like eSWAV and MOB and these places that really are getting tangible results with these young men? Because we both know that the jail system doesn't work. I'm living proof of that. Okay, it took me going to the jail 6 times before I pulled my head in. I was a slow learner, right? But then there's so many men that I was locked up with that are still in and out of the system, because in my experience, there is no rehabilitation in jail. You have to want to change, and for a lot of these people, they don't know how to.
Yeah, and I think part of it now is we're a society that's prepared to talk about alternatives. We're prepared to talk about how we actually can prevent things, as opposed to just punishing and dealing with the consequences. We talk about mental health a lot more than we did 10 years ago.
How good is that though?
It's great. It's absolutely great. And, just looking on the Gold Coast, I'm involved in a number of, whether it's community groups or run clubs, and, that have a focus on, in particular, men's mental health.
Yep.
And it's such a good thing. So we're actually opening up a bit more as a collective, so we can have these discussions. We also have seen more of a focus from the media on youth crime and on young people, and I think that's opened the discussion and changed the way we actually look at a lot of these issues. So I think it's a combination of all that actually makes us say, hang on, we do have an issue. It's a bit more complex than perhaps we've often thought.
Of course.
Let's actually get the people who who work with kids, the people who have, like yourselves, had the experiences, and work with them as a government and as a society to actually come up with a solution to this thing.
So I guess we've spoken a lot about what needs to be done around youth crime, but what other initiatives are the Liberal Party looking at bringing in to help to reduce this youth crime problem we're having?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we see, and it's quite well known here on the Gold Coast, is a lot of the young people who actually commit these crimes, and I'm talking about the hooning and a few of the other things, they're actually filming it and putting it on social media. So this isn't just youth crime we're talking about, this is like hooning and everything as well? Yeah, it's a whole range of different crimes.
Gotcha.
and activity. I actually spoke to a couple in Rebello whose house was broken into and their car was stolen, and they managed to actually track down the kids who who committed this crime.
There's been a bit of that, right? There's been like almost like vigilante.
That's right, and they tracked them down because they posted it on social media, and they were able to, someone sent them a photo and said, is this your car, and whatnot. And so we're seeing this culture brewing of young people actually wanting to show off and be proud of those crimes.
It's the validation, right?
That's right, exactly. And so one of the things that we've committed to doing federally as the Federal Liberal Party is making, in effect, outlawing that. So that is making it an offence to post violent acts and crimes online on social media.
Yeah.
And I think that will go a long way in helping to provide one of those deterrents and those consequences for young people who go and do this.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree more, because I had a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, they went into their house, their daughter was asleep in the car, they jumped out of the car, took their daughter inside before driving the car in, and in the time of them going inside and coming back out their car, there was 2 people in their car driving down the street, driving over the front lawn.
Wow.
And they took it to the police, and obviously with the, I guess, capacity of how much of this is happening, the police couldn't really do much about it because their resources are exhausted as it is.
Absolutely.
And so they took it into their own hands and managed to track their car down to an estate. This is on the Gold Coast, to an estate in Wynnum somewhere, and managed to track the car down. But then from there, it's like, well, we know where our car is. The police then came and got the car back for them.
Yeah. And part of the problem as well is, I speak to so many police officers, whether it's at neighbourhood watch meetings or just, out and about in the community, and the police are feeling that they're also quite fatigued because they know exactly which kids are doing these, committing these crimes.
It's just the same cycle.
They arrest them and then they, they see them on the street the next day. So it's just something that needs to be dealt with, and we need to go in and back our police who are doing a great job for us as well.
100%. Yeah, I 100% agree with you there. And I think that for the most part, a lot of the time, people sort of just stick their heads in the sand and think this problem's just going to go away. But I feel like it's actually something that we need to all contribute to as a community, because as we've spoken about, this youth crime issue doesn't just affect one or two people, it affects the greater community as a whole.
Yep.
And so I guess in your opinion, with all the work that you've done with dealing with youth crime and all the initiatives you've seen, what is it that we need to do, and how do we need to come together as a community to help to support this so we can actually create change and reduce the youth crime statistics so that these young men actually get another opportunity?
I think we've started as a society. So there's a common saying: the first step in solving a problem is to recognise that there is one.
Yeah.
And I think as a society, we have now recognised that there's a problem, and I think we do have our political leaders here in Queensland now very laser focused on solving it. So I think that's the first step as a society, and a lot of people. I obviously helped out with some of our formidable state candidates and MPs here on the Gold Coast at the last election, and a lot of people came up to me and said, you've got our vote because we need to address youth crime. And I heard that countless times, and I'm sure the other candidates did as well. And so I think there is that common will. I think what we need to do is we need to look at the groups that are prepared to actually take a stand and do things on this, like ESWAV, like Fight for Youth, and actually say, okay, now we're prepared to get involved. How can we as society members actually go and support these groups when we do have fundraisers, when we do have events, when we do have, conversations? How can we be a part of that? And part of the problem is often our lives are very busy. Here on the Gold Coast, we're always going between the beach, going between work, going wherever.
Oh, it's a tough life, isn't it?
It's a tough life, very tough life. And I think part of the problem is we think, okay, for us, it's we might not have seen the consequences directly, or we might not have kids ourselves who are going through issues. But how can we actually take that time out to go and support people who are trying to make an impact? And that's where, as a Gold Coast community, we're generally pretty good. We're community-minded, community-focused, and I've been, involved in our community for a number of years, quite extensively on the Gold Coast, and I see those people around the place. We are a community that is. We do like to think of each other, and I think we need to just ramp that up as time goes on.
I love that. Absolutely love it. And I couldn't agree more. It is one of these things that we all need to get behind, I think. And obviously that's the purpose of the Interchange Change for Good challenge, which I think we've already spoken about, you potentially being a part of the run.
I'd love to. I'd love to.
So we've got the 4-hour run, 4-hour downhill mountain bike, 4-hour gym workout, 4-hour pack march, 4-hour open water kayaking session. And each one of those events represents something these kids go through. And I think this is what we're really trying to do with the podcast as well, is to shine a light on the fact that these kids, a lot of them come from troubled homes, right? So for instance, the run itself represents the fact that these kids are running away from something. The downhill mountain biking session is the downward spiral these kids face, where they have to have an uphill climb to get back to where they need to be a respectable member of society. The gym session, 4 hours in the gym, that's going to have to find some inner strength to get through it, right? And that's something these kids have to do every day. The pack march, strength in numbers. It's the fact that these kids are looking for community and they find community in the wrong places. So by providing the right kinds of community, people like ESWA, people like Fight for Youth, and then also like mob, like finding that mob that they can actually get around.
That's right.
To help support them. And then the most important one I think is actually the kayaking, because the fact that not everyone's in the same boat, and we as a society are so quick to judge these kids, to go, you know what, they're a piece of shit. He's a junkie, he's a car thief, but we don't actually take a second to step back and ask the story, like why are they there? Why is it that they've turned to this life of crime? What is it that's happened in their childhood for them to actually feel like that's the only way that they can deal with being a part of society? I think that's what we're really trying to achieve with the challenge. And so,
and I think once we understand a bit better why those kids are there, it also helps with figuring out what the solution is. Of course. Because, for example, I know I'm also involved in Rotary here at Burleigh, and one of the recent projects that we've done is sort of a fishing buddies program where we take a number of kids who may or may not be going down a difficult path, and buddy them up with some of the older gentlemen in the club, and they go out fishing. And it's actually really good because the issue that they've had is they haven't had a proper role model a lot of the time.
That's the big thing,
they
right?
haven't had someone that they can actually speak to.
Yep.
And sometimes it's also someone who can actually be quite direct with them and say, hang on, pull your head in. It's not, this is going to get more complex if you keep going down this path. And so identifying why these kids are going down this path is very important in wanting to solve, I guess, provide for a better future for them.
Yeah, or at least help them to deter away from that lifestyle, right? I think that's a big thing is, like you said, understanding that everyone's got a different story and actually take the time to understand that so we can serve them because, like I said already a couple of times now, is like we know the jail's not working, but that's a one-size-fits-all sort of solution, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's understanding that there is no such thing as one-size-fits-all. Every single one of these kids has a need, has a story, and has a way that they've been dealing with things. So it's about trying to find, I feel, from what I understand, it's finding the way that works for them.
And sometimes it's also looking at how can we provide structure. So, the one size fits all won't, as we've said, jails aren't always going to work for everybody. Some people will be deterred by it, and some people will go in and then
almost thrive in it, right?
Yeah. And so it just really depends. And I think that's where we need to have a multifaceted sort of approach to how we actually deal with this. And I've got a lot of confidence that the new Premier and the team, they're in the process of rewriting the Youth Justice Act, which I think is going to be really important, especially after a period where it was all watered down quite poorly. So I think there's a lot of optimism there. We're speaking about the issues that are really mattering to young people, and also if everything that's relevant to young people are relevant to all of us as well, because in order for us to be a cohesive society, we need to have our young people succeeding, and without that, we're just going to, I guess, the fabric of our society is going to be torn apart. So
quite literally collapse, right? Because they are the future leaders. These kids that are coming up, and obviously, like we said, it's only a very small number of these kids, but it's still enough because it's been growing.
Yeah, well,
it's been growing, exactly right? I think in the last 12 months, my last guest said that there was over 5,000 cars stolen in the last 12 months on the Gold Coast alone.
Yeah,
and those numbers are just continuing to grow. And so, unless we actually do something about it as a community and get involved, rather than just talking about how bad these kids are, I don't think it's going to go any better.
No, that's right, and that's why I think having that focus on prevention in the first place is key. And not only for that, but it costs a lot of money to keep kids in detention facilities.
Yeah,
so even just from an economic perspective, it's not in our interests to have kids locked up.
What does it cost on a yearly basis for one kid to stay in a youth justice system?
So again, this is something that the state team would be across, but I think I've heard a figure of over $700,000, which is insane. And don't quote me on that, but I think that's a considerable amount of money. And as far as I'm concerned, we need to look at how much money is going into that and how much can we actually be putting into preventing a lot of these kids from going down that path in the first place, because that money could be used differently. Not to say that there aren't kids who have committed crimes that are significant enough that would warrant that.
Of course.
But we do want to try and avoid that, because if we succeed at this, not only is there a social benefit, there's a massive economic benefit to us as well, to have kids going down the right track and becoming contributing members of society.
And that's something we were talking about off air as well, is like the economic costs that this is creating for our community, right? So the fact of insurance is going up and all that sort of stuff, because there's such a concentration of crime. And once again, we're just taking them from the environment, putting them into an incubator, then putting them back in the same environment, which is just really just rinse and repeat for these kids. It's obviously affecting us all as well.
Exactly. And look, I've been out and about in this community for a number of years, but especially over the majority of this year as the federal candidate. And the number one issue that everybody raises with me is cost of living, right? You've probably heard it as well. Prices are going up.
Of course.
It's the number one issue. And that's for individuals, but also for businesses and for small businesses. And part of, we all talk about youth crime. And if we don't have kids, or if we don't have any experiences with youth crime, it's sometimes easy to say, oh, well, it's not really an issue for us. Yeah, that's right. Which is totally wrong, because I say to everybody, look at your insurance premiums. Have they gone up? Look at your car insurance.
Year to year, right?
And that's exactly what what we see is, it's the consequence in part of this crisis. So, and when you've got a small business that's having to deal with, their increased costs, their increased rent. Rent's gone up considerably in Australia, and I think it's 16.3%. Since the last election, we've seen increases across the board on a number of different things. If you've got
groceries, everything.
Yeah, but also a lot of young families. If you've got a mortgage, I bought my first house in the last 5 years, and if you've got a mortgage, the average mortgage you're paying an extra $35,000 because of the interest repayments, and so there's a lot of real financial consequences that are, contributing to the increase to costs and to prices. But one of those is people having to take out insurance, people having to invest in businesses, having to invest in new security systems, new alarm systems, people being scared of, being broken into, are having to do all this stuff, and it's costing money.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to touch on, is like obviously the psychological effects this has as well, because I had another guest in here earlier today, and he was talking about how him and his family can't even live in a house any longer because they went through a very traumatic experience where the kids were in a car in his driveway and trying to run him over as he was trying to chase him out the car, and he's lived in an apartment ever since and wanted to move into a house because he's got 2 young boys.
Yeah.
And, this is not an isolated story.
No, and it's absolutely quite unconscionable if you really think about it, that people are actually having the discussion about where they keep their car keys. They keep their car keys. Do we keep it in our room in case
do we
somebody
have a safe for that in case?
Yeah,
right?
But and not only that, but some people are having the conversation. I heard this recently where they're saying we just keep our keys near the front door. So if someone comes in, they just take the car. They don't come next to us. Now that's not a conversation we should be having in a country like Australia.
Crazy, isn't it?
I know an elderly couple in Eleanor who were broken into. Both of them would be above their 70s. They're broken into while they were sleeping overnight. 2 young kids went and stole their cars, and they struggled for a while afterwards with having to be comfortable living by themselves or, together at home.
In their own home.
In their own home. And it's really, not something, it's not a place we should be in.
No, I completely agree, man. Well, really cool that I guess we are having these conversations because it is shedding a lot of light on the actual issue. And I guess being able to paint this from different perspectives from the community is also helping the greater community be able to see it in a different light as well.
Absolutely. And, it's so important that people like you, Ben, are just adding your voice to this debate and this conversation. It's more of a conversation than a debate.
Yeah.
I think we're all in agreement of, something needs to be done.
I don't think anyone's against doing something about it, right?
Exactly right. So, it's so important to hear from someone like you in this conversation because you've actually seen it from the other side. You've had the experiences, and I think what that does is it makes you, and we were talking about this before, it makes you actually relatable to a lot of these young people. And I know, that you've already got a record of helping a number of, in particular, young men, and it doesn't surprise me at all because you are able to relate to them and have that experience. And I think having more and more people like you involved in this discussion, involved in this space, is going to be the way that we actually address this.
I couldn't agree more, man. Thanks very much for coming on, Leon. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to come and have a conversation about something that really is on the tip of everyone's tongue, especially at the moment. So if people want to find out more about you, and I guess track you down, where would they find you, brother?
So usually they'll probably see me waving on the side of the road going forward. But and I do a number of listening.
Don't stand next to a puddle.
No, I'll try not to. I think we've learned that one. No, but you can go onto my social media. So Facebook, I think I'm just Leon Rebello LNP. Same on Instagram, Leon Rebello LNP. My contact details, my mobile number, it's all online on the website.
Awesome.
And so people are welcome to in fact, I encourage them to get in touch with me because I'm here to think about how we can make our community better. And the first step of that is understanding what people want. So I've been out listening to the community for a long time now. I've got a number of ideas that should I be fortunate to be elected as the next member, I'd love to push for. And I'm always happy to hear everyone's views and to be a part of this community in a different way.
Amazing, brother. Well, man, I'm looking forward to, working alongside you with this to help to, I guess, shed some light on this youth crime issue and also hopefully help to curb it.
No, thank you. And I look forward to the run already.
Yes, yeah. So we'll see you out there on the track, right?
Absolutely.
22nd, 23rd of Feb. Don't miss it.
Sounds good.
Awesome.